Yo guys, this is Jack and today we're going to be talking about The Drama. This is a film that just came out this weekend and I saw it last night. I wanted to immediately record a review of this film after I saw it, but I think I had to kind of sit with it, especially since I started to read a lot of reviews and watch a couple of video reviews from one of my favorite YouTube channels and trying to dissect what the film is actually saying before I hop on camera and actually kind of dissect the whole thing. So I'm going to split this video into two parts. The first part is just going to be a non-spoiler. I'm going to talk about what I like about the film and the plot without spoiling it, and then eventually I'll get to the spoilers, because this is one of those films where you can't really spoil the actual twists of this film because immediately it tells you what it is and then you have to kind of sit with it. So let's kind of dive into it. And before I even do that, I want to thank you guys so much for subscribing to my channel. I just hit 500 subscribers. It might go down. I post this review up, but yeah, man, this is just really awesome. I'm super happy from the bottom of my heart. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to continue to do what I need to do with this channel. I might switch up some things, especially when we get closer to the summer. I want to actually experiment with some of the ideas that I have in my brain right now, but we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on down the line. But let's kind of dive into the review for The Drama. So the plot is basically you have a couple who are engaged and they're getting to a point where they are starting to think about marrying each other. And Zendaya, whose character is Emma, is at a moment where she's really in love with Robert Pattinson's character, Charlie, and they decide to get married. And in the beginning of the film, you see Charlie try to write a speech for the wedding, and he's constantly trying to edit it. He's with his friend, played by Mamadou Athie, and he's kind of in a moment where he's trying to help Charlie out with the wedding speech. And eventually you split between Charlie and Emma and both of their perspectives and how they're trying to deal with going through the wedding. But the actual hook of the film starts to really boil in when Lana Haim's character, Rachel, and Mike, who is Mamadou Athie, they go to a mock-up kind of wine tasting place where they're trying to figure out which type of wine they're going to choose for the wedding. And they're drunk, they're drinking a lot, and eventually the conversation starts to deviate into a question of what is the worst thing you've done in your life. And from the beginning of that conversation, you hear Mike and Rachel both kind of talk about their experiences with that question. Mike's confession is kind of an action where he did something that kind of was offensive, but he kind of thought about it and changed his own perspective and ways. Meanwhile, Rachel's confession of that question is a little bit different and kind of questions her morality and her kind of way of learning the world. And then you get to Emma's confession after Charlie's confession, and she blurts out something that is very horrific, terrifying, and kind of something that might actually change someone's perspective of that person. And once she blurts out that confession, the whole dynamic changes and you start to see the cracks crumble, especially with Robert Pattinson's character, Charlie, who takes the information and tries to figure out a solution. And that's his own kind of journey as you're following him, and Emma's journey after the aftermath of that question. So what this film tries to do is it tries to really show the emotions of inaction and action with all the characters, especially with their past lives and what they're going through. And Charlie and Emma, as they really try to kind of figure out what to do with that type of impulsion that one of the characters went through in the past, starts to really kind of destroy their own selves, as Robert Pattinson is kind of really trying to figure out a solution to the issue from the past. And he goes on a journey where it starts to become very destructive, and he starts to really understand some of the stuff that he has done in his past, while also trying to figure out what is love, what is the idea of love, and how can I fix this relationship that is falling apart. And Zendaya's character, her past, once you understand her perspective, you start to really understand herself and how she came through with those demons, and she holds it on her own throughout this entire film. I was extremely impressed by Zendaya's performance. We've seen a few performances where she has kind of like a range of emotions. Most recently with Challengers from 2 years ago, where she was playing kind of like this very sporty person and very confident person. And here she is very confident, but her past, once that is completely laid out with all the characters figuring out the past, she starts to really kind of go back to her old ways a little bit, but then eventually she jumps out of it and she stands her own ground. And I think this is what the film is trying to say, is that all these characters have these types of like contradictions with their lives and how they perceive other people, and the way people perceive each other can cause a rift between different types of like dynamics and emotions. And especially with Alana Haim's character, who quite frankly from the beginning, she's very expressive and loud, but once you hear her confession with that question of what's the worst thing you've done in your life, when she explains her side of her confession, then you kind of like really start to figure out like, oh shit, like this character that Alana Haim is playing is very vindictive and very destructive and very disgusting. And Alana Haim, her performance is really brilliant. She shows that range, and quite frankly, when I saw like some of the social media reactions behind Alana Haim's character, I was like just taken aback because people were just shitting on her like personality of like the character and just like her acting. I was just like, what the fuck? Like, have you seen Licorice Pizza? Like, she did a fucking great job in that film. And the small role she did in One Battle After Another. But yeah, like her performance was great. Robert Pattinson's performance was also really great. He's playing like a goofball who eventually is crashing out in real time. I would also say other characters that show up, like Zoe Winters, who we saw in Materialists last year. She does a really good job playing like the photographer who is kind of trying to make sure like the photos are well, but she plays like the comedic relief role. And I would say also the same with Haley Gates, who appears out of nowhere and kind of like steals the thunder of like supporting actress drama away from like Alana Haim. And she has a really great moment in the third act of the film, which kind of like balances out the chaos of the film. And yeah, like I was just like really riveted and just like taken aback by how this film really goes hard with the cringe factor and like the emotions of all these characters. Christopher Borgli, his last film, Dream Scenario, really played a lot with cringe and really crazy character dynamics. And this one feels more refined, feels more fresher, feels more stretched out compared to Dream Scenario, where that film was kind of like spinning its wheels with that theme of a guy showing up in people's dreams and then everybody is trying to make him famous. And yeah, this film really, really plays hard with the dark, dramatic, comedic, romantic genre tropes. Subverts it also as well. But yeah, like this was just fantastic. It's one of those films where the more I think about it, it really kind of like makes the film more fresher. Especially if you do watch it a second time, I can kind of like pick up more things if I would able to do that. I haven't seen it a second time. I really want to see it a second time. So yeah, I give it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Let's kind of like go deeper into the film while spoiling it. So, spoiler alert. Let's talk about what the twist actually is. So basically, the twist of the film is the actual question of what is the worst thing you've ever done in your life. And Alana Haim's confession is basically her confessing that she was friends with this mentally out there child, and in the past she was trying to kind of like communicate with like this kid, and one day they go on an adventure in the forest and eventually they find a shed, and in a weird impulsion moment, Alana Haim's character locks the mentally stunted child in the shed and leaves him for the whole entire night. And the characters in the film question about like the story, and like they're kind of trying to figure out like, is the kid okay? What happens after you locked the kid? And Alana Haim's character is kind of like dismissive about like the story and dismissive about the kid, and he's just like, I don't know what happened to the kid. The father showed up to the house that night asking where the kid was, and she just said, I don't know where she is or where he is. And that causes a whole thing where the kid is being, searched, and that's the end of the story. So when you get to Emma, played by Zendaya's confession, which is basically, I actually tried to commit a mass shooting. Yeah, that's when the film kind of like goes, scoot! Hold up, wait a minute. Did you just say that you were trying to commit a mass shooting when you were young? And everybody like freaks out. Robert Pattinson's character, his confession is just basically him explaining that he cyberbullied a kid and eventually the kid moved away, but he doesn't know where the kid is now. But that is like kind of a form of inaction where Robert Pattinson's character is thinking about the past, the way he didn't act upon like his grievances, and now like in the past or the present of him kind of talking about like his confession, he's regretful, but also at the same time he's just like, I don't know what happened to me back then. And that's kind of the same thing with Emma when she explains that she was in this like state of depression and mania when she was a kid. She was bullied and she didn't have any friends, so she got deep into like the rabbit hole of mass shootings, and this was like around the time of like Columbine in the 90s. So when she started to like really read about that and really kind of like think about how to do that act, she stole her father's gun and she tried to perform the mass shooting. But before she even tried, she heard a story that happened 2 weeks earlier of a mass shooting in a mall where a bunch of her school friends died, and she takes that perspective and goes, oh shit, like what am I doing? This is kind of fucked up. I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm actually going to join a protest to, stop gun violence in America. And this changes her whole perspective and her whole life. And she takes all the stuff that negatively happened to her in the past, she changes for the better. And now she's a person where she's free from all the grievances and pain of her past. And now these people who are very shocked about like this revelation that happened in her past are taking it out on her. And this is the whole idea of like contradictions and the idea of how humans interact with newfound information and ways of just discussing life that happened to that person. And it really changes your perspective on like how we communicate with these types of people. So that's the whole kind of thematic of this film, is you're following all these characters, you're trying to figure out how they're going to deal with like this newfound information from Emma. And the way Robert Pattinson's character takes it, at first he's just like, wait, did I just, get into a relationship where this person is violent? Like, how do I really kind of try to dissect this information? And his way of thinking is just like, okay, I want to fix it. I want to talk about this. And Zendaya's character is just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to deal with it. She's constantly throwing up as like a reaction to all this mania that's happening. And that causes a whole thing where Robert Pattinson's character eventually cheats on Emma. And this is in a way where Haley Gates's character shows up. And her character is really interesting because the question brings up again with the whole idea of like, what is the worst thing you've ever done? And Haley Gates's character says, the worst thing that I've ever done is cheated on my boyfriend. And my boyfriend was a really nice person, and the person that I used to kind of cheat my boyfriend was mean and evil, but the sex was good, so whatever. And she's very dismissive. But Charlie, Robert Pattinson's character, is like, what if you married a person or is in a relationship with a person who tried to do a mass shooting? And Haley Gates's character is just like, well, I would just say call the police. And Charlie is just very disgruntled and kind of like revved up, and he gets angry. And then a few minutes later, he's having sex with Haley Gates's character. And that's the whole action of these people, is just going down this rabbit hole, going through like the contradictions of life, and eventually hurting other people around other people, if that makes sense. And while Emma, Zendaya's character, is already moving past her past and is already a person that has already changed for the better, you have Charlie, who hasn't done the same and hasn't really changed as a person aside from trying to be married to this person who has changed. And it's a whole thing where, you know, you enter into relationships and you don't know the person fully, even when you know, are in a relationship for a really long time. It just kind of reflects and kind of boils later on down the line in life. And that's a really interesting kind of take of this film. Borgli also kind of plays a little bit about the culture of America with mass shootings, as Charlie is a art director, a museum art director, who's constantly bringing back and forth books and art from around the world. And there's a scene where a book where all these like models are with guns, kind of just like playing around with the guns. His way of like thinking when, you know, the revelation of like his soon-to-be wife tried to perform a mass shooting causes him to really kind of like think about the culture of violence in America. And Robert Pattinson's character is British. He's in a normal British accent, and he brings up this revelation and this kind of line of critical thinking to Alana Haim's character, and Alana Haim's character just laughs it off because she's just like, no, that's not it. Like, Emma's just a fucked up person. And even way before that, when you start to really understand Alana Haim's perspective of this like revelation behind Emma's confession, she also mentions that her cousin was a survivor of a mass shooting, and she says like, this is fucked up, like you are actively hurting my cousin, who quite frankly doesn't really know the whole idea of this person who tried to commit a mass shooting. And also on top of that, they don't know each other. So this is another like story theme that eventually shows up once Rachel, Alana Haim's character, tries to bring her cousin to a meeting with Charlie in the area, and Charlie is very like fidgeted and he's trying to fix everything. So he eventually tries to corner Alana Haim's cousin character, and that causes a whole kind of cringe moment. And eventually you get to the wedding, the actual wedding, where all of these characters are on the fritz, on the edge, and it's like knives out once the wedding happens. And oh man, the wedding, like the actual like scene itself is just fucking insane, intense. There's a moment where like the DJ, one of the DJs just quits and another DJ just shows up, and the DJ is trying to sort out like the tech stuff and hits on a wrong wire, and it sounds like a gun being shot in the middle of Charlie's speech. Actually, no, in the middle of Zendaya's character dad going through like a speech. Eventually, Charlie starts to talk about his soon-to-be wife in the speech, and in the beginning of the film, he's trying to write the speech, he's trying to make sure it's very funny. His friend, played by Mamadou Athie, is constantly giving him suggestions while also explaining like, hey, don't talk about sex, don't talk about like her laugh as being kind of like repulsive. So when you get to the actual speech, and he shreds the actual speech before all of this, so he's going off the dome, and eventually he thinks about like the repulsive laugh that Zendaya's character does, the sex being good, and everybody just starts cringing. And Haley Gates' boyfriend, current boyfriend, is looking at him and eventually assaults Charlie. And the whole film spirals out of control. And the film basically ends with Charlie and Emma kind of like distant away from each other. Charlie's beaten up. Emma's just like defeated by all the gossip and just stuff that happened way before the wedding happens. And eventually they meet up with each other at their favorite diner. They look at each other, and they look at each other and start to talk to each other in a way where they don't know each other, and they start from the beginning, and the movie ends. And I think the film's ending is quite brilliant because it really tries to kind of like drill in the notion of trying to figure out how these type of people that you're, you know, grown to love have like these really kind of terrible past lives, and they don't know how to share these feelings and emotions. So the only way to do it is just to bottle up their emotions. And even before that, there's a scene where Charlie kind of talks about the idea of bottling up emotions through writing from an author. I forgot the author. And there's also really kind of like really cool moments and kind of intricate moments where you're thinking about like the racial dynamics between Robert Pattinson's character and Zendaya. Zendaya is a strong black woman who has all this crazy stuff that happened to her in her life. And then she just kind of like takes it and then becomes a stronger woman, while this white British cis male is still going through a lot of baggage and doesn't know how to really think critically about some of the stuff that's happening in his life. While also there's a reference to HarperCollins in the beginning of the film, where Zendaya's character is reading like this book from HarperCollins, and it plays with the idea of like HarperCollins or HarperCollins and Harper Lee, feminine, masculine, both authors who kind of like went through changes in their lives. And then there's also, again, the whole idea of like America being obsessed with like violence and sensationalism and gun violence in America, and mass shootings being very numb to the point where a whole entire American society is not acting upon fixing the issue. Instead, they're just like, it's just another day in America, mass shootings. Like, this is how it is. And I think really brilliantly tries to lay all that out there, out in the open, so that people can really think about what we're going through in America. And I think all of these characters, when they really start to understand the idea of this revelation that Emma just explained in the beginning of the film, you just really understand just a negative connotation of that, but also just like the emotions and feelings. And it really made me think about just how we're not really addressing our own past lives. We're not really addressing just how we really feel as a person, especially in relationships. And this is definitely one of those films where you watch it, and if you're watching it with someone who you love, who you really care, it's a really good conversation starter. And it's a really good film to kind of boil and think about. So that's why I give it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's probably because of the fact that I got a lot of stuff out of this film. And again, all the performances are great. Zendaya is like on the top of her game. I completely disagree about the idea of her not being a good actress. I see that a lot on the internet. She's doing like quote unquote the same face, the same expressions, and no, she does a lot of like really varied range in this film, varied range of emotions. And same with like Robert Pattinson. Like, again, he's always great in these types of films, and this is another one where he's doing a really great job. As far as like awards potential goes, this is like a Golden Globes type of deal. I could see Zendaya and Robert Pattinson and the film be nominated for Golden Globes, and maybe Critics' Choice if the field is weak this year. But other than that, that's basically it. I don't really need to say too much about like its awards potential, but yeah, man, that's basically it. Thank you guys. I will be doing more reviews, and yeah, stick around for that. Thank you guys. Peace out.